Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where two mental health professionals talk about their mental health journey and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist, and today I am super stoked to have no surprises for regular listeners, another therapist who hails from the neurodivergent spaces to have a wandering conversation. I am joined by Bria Servoss. We talked about it. I wrote it down and I was like, I'm going to say it wrong. Servoss. Yeah, let's jump in. We can talk about how we sort of connected and the overlap in our work. But the first question I ask everybody for every episode is, how did you end up working in the mental health field?
Yeah. So people who ask me this, I usually am like, I have a wandering, maybe this is your story as well, but like this wandering kind of way. I did things backwards, quote unquote, is what I've told people. It's a sense of like, I got out of high school and I was an AP Psych actually for whatever that's worth, in my senior year of high school. And my teacher at the time, he was like, you should go into this. And I was like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. I'm going to be a rock and roll star. And he was like, okay, well, you could do this. And I ended up moving towards doing hair, actually. And I always liked psychology. I always liked the idea of the human mind and how people kind of operate. But it just was never, I wasn't ready for college. And so I just ended up becoming a hairdresser so that I could support myself while I sang. And I sang jazz and I sang rock. I sang all these different types of things. I did these weird chamber rock things. I eventually moved to Chicago where I continued to do that. I did hair, did music, went back to school when I was 24, dropped out again, went back, graduated at 30 with a psych degree and women's and gender and women's studies minor, and with like a feminist emphasis. And I thought, okay, well, I finally did it. And that's the abridged version. But I won't waste your time. I mean, like going into, but I did end up going into psychology. And then I decided I'm gonna get my PsyD and my psychology doctorate. And after one semester, I said, I cannot do the ivory tower. This is not for me. These people have so much ego. And it was like, I got the good grades. I did all the things. I wrote the papers but I asked too many questions. And they actually told me, they said, this is graduate school. You should actually have those questions already answered for you in undergrad. Quit asking them. It's like, yeah, it was interesting. And I was like, forget this. I'm not doing this. So I opted out and thought, I'm just never going to be able to be the therapist I thought I'll just go back to doing hair. Maybe this is where I belong. I can talk to people as if they are my therapy clients. A lot of them were kind of that way. And I would always get thanked, like, thanks for the free therapy. I'd be like, haha, yeah, good. Okay, have a great day. Enjoy your hair. Yeah. And then eventually I moved to Madison because I was in Chicago for nearly 15 years, had a child, then did everything backwards. Because I didn't get married. I had a kid. We split up. And a few years later, I'm sitting with a hair client in my chair, and she's in a social work program in Madison. And she's one of my dear friends now, but she's like, go back. Why? Because I was telling her, I was like, I always thought I should be a therapist. And she said, go back. I said, but I'm going to be so old when I graduate, I'm going to be 43. That's so old. And she's like, you're going to be 43 regardless. Like, you're still going to be, why are you not? You're doing the work. This is going to be, just do it, go. And so I did. And I went through it during the pandemic and studied hard and had a couple nervous breakdowns and like, yeah, here I am.
Yeah. There's a bunch that I want to follow up with there, but I'm going to start with the hairdressing piece because I get my hair cut once every 3 years. It's it's still long. I just cut a foot off of it. But I like to joke with my hairdresser about how, like, yeah, she's really just doing therapy, and it's just a different setting, and helping, the degree is what dictates, apparently, in our modern society, who gets to be an expert and who doesn't. And again, I think there's utility to having an expert. I think there's utility. I don't like to use the word expert. I think training matters. I think the knowledge base we gather through our education is important, but like viewing it wide lens as helpers, like, yeah, when I was in grad school, one of my supervisors said I should be a bartender. And like, I went and learned how to be a bartender, and I'm an introvert. So like, yes, I'm good with talking with people, but not in that setting. But it was like, again, for those of us, I think, who are kind of drawn to this work, like we connect with people, and that's the skill. That's the sort of innate ability.
Yeah, well, and I think too, there's like all this crisis work that you come in, like in those jobs, in those trades, like bartending, hairdressing. There's this you're because you're in these people's lives in this really intimate way. I mean, you're either serving drinks and they want to talk, they want to spill their guts, because you're a safe place, you've heard it all, quote unquote, all those things, or and same for hairdressing, except you have your hands on their body, like it's in their hair. It's very weirdly, your face is like, your breath is in their face for some of the things. It's very intimate. And that piece, like, I think they become you become connected to each other in a really intimate way. And so they tell you things. And I think you end up in crisis situations too. Like I had a client years ago who her ex showed up and was stalking the salon. He was outside, and she said, "I have to tell you something." And I ended up, being, basically doing a safety check with her before I had those skills, and making sure that she was going to be okay if I let her leave. And I gave her information to the domestic violence shelter nearby. And I mean, it was all of these kind of things. And I realized, like, that was, moments like that, or the time, a woman wanted me to cut her dreads all off. And, that was, and it symbolized a lot of trauma for her, and checking in with her throughout the haircut, and like, is this okay? Are we okay? Do you want to keep going? And like these moments where I was like, this is incredible. It's an honor. And I want to do this more. Like, I want to do this all the time. Like, I want to do this stuff. So yeah, I mean, getting in the room, it's interesting. The rapport part of working with clients is like a snap for me. Because it is because it's one-on-one or one-on-two, I guess, or depending. But it's easier than I'd say. Like, I can't even imagine doing bartending. Like, I love the idea of bartending, but the fact that you did, that's a lot. That's a lot. I don't know if you have sensory stuff, but like that was one of the things when I did hair. I would like be listening to someone, and not all hairdressers, I'm sure you know this, are quiet. They talk a lot. And I would I wouldn't be able to hear what my client was saying. And because I'd be trying to listen to them, but I'd be distracted. So that I didn't realize at the time that was like my auditory stuff coming up. And it would make me just so frustrated, so irritable and angry, like during these moments, And so, the fact that I found out later I was ADHD, I was like, all of the things in my life are kind of falling into place, and that was one of them.
My ADHD is why I don't get my hair cut very often, for the things you were talking about having someone touching me, having someone right in my face. Like, that's all very, I will say, discomforting for me. And so it's not to look cool or because I'm a hipster. It's because I don't like having people in my face.
It's deeply unsettling. And everyone, it really isn't just like they're standing above. It's like they're in your space. It's
There's some,
go ahead.
I think, vulnerability too. You're talking about some of these crisis management situations you went through, but like even people talking about what they want to look like or how they're hoping to feel for their look, like that's, I mean, there's such an easy segue into hopes and dreams and how they feel about themselves and esteem and like meaning making even. Like there's a lot of stuff there in addition to what I would say is probably some of the ritual stuff of getting a regular haircut. And like, you know, there's a routine, there's a expectation with some of that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's this show called Fleabag. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Yeah, I love Fleabag. Watch
Yeah.
Fleabag. It's amazing. Season 2 is all about religious drama, so I like that.
Oh yeah, it's just like it's one of the more ingenious. It's like in my top 5 in the last like 10 years of all shows created that time period. And it's because what they say is what she touches on is all those, like, it's the vulnerability and it's like the trauma and the unwillingness to kind of see yourself. But also there's this moment in it, which is really funny and why I brought it up originally, where she walks in with her sister after getting a haircut and she's,
you look like the tip of a pencil.
And so, and he's like, and she goes on that, you know, that like monologue of like, hair means everything. And it's true. I mean, it isn't true. That is not true. But emotionally in the moment, it is like people get that's like, it's so informative and like completely, I mean, it can make or break your day. It's like a psychological tool. And actually I was thinking of back to school. God, God forbid. I do not think it's going to happen, but I want to do research I really want to do research on the effects of hair and transformation and psychological, like mental wellness.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing out there. Like it's bizarre, but nothing out there other than like women of color and their relationship to their hair. There are like a couple studies on that, but nothing, you know, and then of course the trans population, how does it, you know, affirming. And I thought that was, I just think it's ripe. It's ready.
Oh, and that there's so much identity that can be there. I used to rent, where I used to rent, I was right next to another small business that did hair implants. And when I wasn't in session, I would have my door open and I could sometimes hear some of what they were talking about. And it was like 10 grand for like these hair implants. And I just wanted to be like, I'm just going to walk over and start stealing their clients to be like, hey, therapy's cheaper and I can help you feel good about yourself without needing to spend 10 grand. You know, a lot of these aging dudes or dudes who are balding early. It's just like, I hear you. I'm not the person to approach you with my hair, but also like, let's talk about what this is doing for your self-confidence and your self-esteem.
Yes. Like 100%, 110%. Yes.
One of the other things you mentioned and that hesitancy about doing research is like this academic ivory tower. I will say like the political nature of academics is really bad in our profession. It's bad everywhere, I'm assuming. But for people who are well informed about implicit biases and the shortcuts our brains takes and in-group, out-group dynamics, there's an awful lot of politicking and pretentiousness that happens on the academic side of things.
Yeah. It's astounding. It really is astounding. And the amount of professors that don't want to be challenged because they just, I can't speak for them. I have no idea why that is, but I'm a challengey kind of person. Like that's how I learn. Part of my, you know, I could say it's part of my neurodivergence, but for me, for most of my life, since I wasn't diagnosed, it was, I always said, this is how I learn. This is how I engage. This is how I basically put away the information to use for a later date. And also if I find that there's something that doesn't make sense to me, especially as an existentialist, as someone who is always like questioning the real meaning behind why anyone would do something, and then to not be able to, or feel kind of this, there's always this reluctance, I guess, from that I've heard would get in response from certain professors. And I went to, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 3 different schools over the course from undergrad until I got my master's. And in every, the only place I really didn't get pushback was in my undergrad, to be perfectly honest. I got more, they liked the engagement, probably because it was a bunch of 18-year-olds who were like, I don't care. But,
Yeah.
you know, they're like, actually, I have something to say. And they would be like, this is great. Like, this is what we want. This is why we're teaching.
Right.
But I did not experience that in the master's levels, or it was a lot more just take what we're telling you and why are you not accepting it? And, oh, you're a rabble rouser or you're a squeaky wheel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was, and for me, I just thought that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm more just kind of challenging this idea that whatever you're telling me or whatever we're reading is just true. Like, I just don't buy into that. Like, I think there are a lot of truths, and I think there's a lot of really problematic pieces of research. So
yeah,
like, sorry, I don't know. I'm not sorry,
yeah.
I guess.
Well, and you know, we can talk about ADHD and some of the persistent drive for autonomy, and this idea of like there is. I like to say I'm contrarian by nature. Like there is some of that your brain is hardwired for. Not everybody who has neurodivergence has this, but it is a subset of behaviors that we know about. And so I think like that's some of it. But like I was that same way. If I wasn't actively challenging what I was being taught, I was bored and probably not paying attention. So it's kind of like how I learned to stay focused, was to basically pick fights with my teachers.
And there's nothing quite like that let's be honest, there's nothing quite like that dopamine drip, like while you're in the midst of kind of pushing the envelope a little.
Yeah.
And yet, like, in defense of that, like, while that might be part of that, the reason that happens, it's also really valuable. I can't, I just can't imagine being a professor, instructor, whatever, never, kind of doing this thing, every semester. It's the same as, this is what we do. This is how we talk about it. This is the information I have. Like, doesn't it break up your day a little bit? Having some, like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and then I think, you mentioned doing like feminist studies and having some of that as a background. I was a cultural studies minor, which is a little bit different, but I went to University of Minnesota, which is a big research institution. So psychology is science. And then I took these cultural studies classes that were like, what would Freud say about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein? Let's wildly hypothesize. And like, my brain likes both of those things. Like, I liked to go between the science, the research, the data is useful. And also, we can't take what the data says in general and apply it to individuals. And so we do need this ability to kind of connect on a human level and explore and be curious and maintain a lot of that. Otherwise, we're just kind of dogmatic about it.
Yeah, I agree. It's really, there's a lot of philosophy that I kind of bring into, like, I think my practice, and it's for that reason. I mean, I think that there's just so many questions, and I think there are more questions than answers, and that's okay. And I think to kind of put, the idea of therapy as, I mean, everyone's like, it's a, what do they say? It's a science and an art or whatever. And I argue it's a theory, and it can be artful. And in the way that we connect with others. But I think it really should be, I don't know. I feel like sometimes authenticity isn't necessarily pushed as much as it should be. Like, I think they talk about it, but at the end of the day, like, I think that's the cornerstone of my, like, how I do this work is at the end of, like, I don't know everything. I don't, I'm happily do not know everything. And I think that leaves a lot more room for agency on the client's end, I guess, like, because you're the one doing, like, I'm not going to do this for you. Why would you want me to? Like, that's
right.
I don't know, if we're being real, like, that seems like it goes against the whole purpose of it. And I mean, and that's why philosophy, back to like what we were talking about, just even classes or university studies and things like that. That's why they're so interesting, is that it gives you a chance to really work hard and think about authentically about, like, well, how do things kind of piece together? Philosophy was one of my strong suits. I really loved philosophy. It was also one of my worst classes ever because I would often just get super frustrated and that's that's the purpose, I think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I grew up very conservative Christian, which is why I do religious trauma work now. But I went to a religious high school and we had a philosophy class, which is a terrible way to learn philosophy from a religious high school. But we were studying Voltaire, and I remember, talking about that dopamine drip and pushing back. Like, I remember just kind of raising my hand to be like, yeah, but this dude liked 8-year-olds. So why are we learning what he says about love? And like just watching like all the blood drain from my professor's face, and like nobody else had probably even read it, let alone like gone and like looked up Voltaire and like done the deep dive that I did just to have this like, let me ruin this class.
That's hysterical.
Yeah. But like, yeah, I was doing, and that was my approach with Freud, like the family history, and like I'm a marriage therapist. That's my licensure. So like that always made sense to me to like zoom out and like, what's the context this person exists in? And like looking at Freud's family history makes Freud's psychology and all its flaws make a lot more sense. And I think, again, like, yeah, authenticity isn't talked about. When I was in grad school 15 years ago, it was specifically dampened. Like, let's not do that. We want to be that blank slate therapist who's not bringing our own stuff in. And that was the feedback I got all the time, was like, you're not professional enough for this.
Yeah. Right.
Sure. I don't like your version of professional. So, and I didn't have that language at the time, but like, yeah, you're approaching it later in life with all this lived experience of how to connect with humans, like to set that authenticity aside doesn't make any sense.
Well, right. And I mean, we can't erase our past. I mean, we can't. In fact, why would we want to? I mean, and the idea that like this blank slate thing, who wants to talk to a professional about about their like deepest fears and trauma? Like, ew.
Yeah.
No. Right. And I think, and I think there was some question too, because I have this kind of patchwork quilt background and I have some dicey things that have bad choices or just interesting choices. It's a choice. Like that's my like little, it's a choice. That's a choice. And I say that to past Bria too, because it's the kind of stuff that if my parents only knew, they would have been just up all night, just calling people and saying, please find our daughter. She's making choices. But I think like I show up in class and I'm covered in tattoos. And there was like, it was funny because there was this moment I remember when we were first working in like practicum and they record you and do all these things. And, it was summer. So I was sleeveless and I was just sitting in there and one of the feedback, it was actually positive. It was lovely. But one of the professors said, well, and you're very you have a lot of art on your body. But you know what? That's authentic to you. That's authentic to how you show up in the space. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, I guess that's true. And also,
yeah,
I never even think about it because it's just part of my body now. So it's interesting to have people comment on that, but that never even comes up. Like, if anything, hopefully it's just a non-issue, but yeah, I kind of went off, didn't I? I just went into like a tangent, but
I think, it's one of the differences between academia, I think, and practice. Like my internship sites loved me. Like they encouraged me to do the licensure program in marriage and family because like they're like, you're good at this. It seems it makes sense to your brain. Whereas like grad school is like, we don't know if you're cut out for this. Like, and having a supervisor who wore slippers because her feet got cold and she was a better therapist if she wasn't worrying about her feet being cold rather than worrying about like professionalism.
yeah.
I didn't get my diagnosis till my last semester of grad or post grad, which is a dumb time to get your ADHD diagnosis. But like I have a lot of sensory stuff. So like the suit and tie, the button-up shirt buttoned all the way up, like I can't do that. That's uncomfortable for me. So I had all these people pushing their idea of therapy and then in academia. And then when I went into practicum and worked with people who were doing the work, they were like, you have to be comfortable. Otherwise, the people you work with won't feel comfortable. Like they'll pick up on that.
It's
like,
such an
oh,
equation. It's so easy.
yeah,
Why that seems, it makes so much sense. It's so funny that that's not the most obvious thing when we're in
yeah.
school, right?
And
That's
I do have hope for the future that the younger generation is getting a better version of this when I talk to younger therapists and see some of the decolonizing work that's going on and some of the books that people are reading, and they do therapy wearing a sweatshirt or a hoodie, and like their clients don't care and they don't care. I'm like, oh, that's so lovely. Yes,
yeah,
like good. We're just
yeah.
people.
I have a colleague, or since starting my private practice, I don't have colleagues. I guess I do kind of, but they're like in the hallway. Like then we don't talk that often.
Yeah.
Tips in the night. But at the place I came from, he's still, I consider a dear friend. He wears like his metal shirts every once in a while. Like, if he's just like not feeling it, his hair, he wears his metal shirts. And I think, like, to me, that's just like, yes, like that's how it should be. We should just be, and he does great work. He works with couples primarily. And I mean, some individuals too, but like, I just think it's really interesting how how you feel like you're forced to show up and, act the part, be what people like, what that looks like online or in TV or whatever. Yeah. But I mean, I remember even thinking, cause I am prone to wearing like lower cut things just because they look better on me, but not for any like sexy reason or anything like that, but
Sure.
Style choice, and I remember just thinking like, okay, so what's true for me, especially if I'm doing work with primarily women or like female identified folks. It's like, what's the message if I'm just like not being myself? I'm worried about what, my boobs, like, is that what's here? Like, obviously I don't want to be distracting, but like if we're worried about distraction, right? Like I think about people notice us. We aren't just blank slates. They notice if we cut our hair. They notice if we're wearing a pair of pants that they like, or a skirt, or, whatever, or my tattoos, for instance, and I think it's true. That's part of the deal. Address it if they feel like they want to and move on. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's that big of a deal. And then if I'm also pro-sex, which I am, I'm pro, anti-shame, pro-sexual, like owning your sexuality as like a part of who you are, of, who am I to like sit around and like worry about whether you can see my cleavage? It's just all of this. It's just very interesting to me, like that's a question for a lot of people, but we're human beings.
We're human beings. Some of us have boobs. These things happen. I love the tattoo conversation too, because like millennials, I know the data for millennials as a millennial, over 80% of us have tattoos. So like this idea that like, ooh, a client might judge you, like probably judge you more if you don't have tattoos. Like I ask my clients about their tattoos, like not to take over the session, but like sometimes it's a connection point for us. Sometimes it's just really cool artwork and I want to know who their artist is. Like that's just a very, I would say, normal human interaction. It I don't know, evens the playing field. I'm not trying to show up as an expert who's going to tell you what to do. Like I'm a person who also has tattoos. Tell me about yours. Like, because I like tattoos.
Yeah, well, it's funny because my tattoos, I'm not sure if that's what it is, but I think I think some clients think I'm a lot younger than I am. When I'm like, oh, well, if it comes up, I'm like, well, look, you're 23, I'm 45. It might be different for you. Like in this, when we're talking, casually, never as like a point of contention or a point of process or anything. But, and they're like, inevitably it's this, oh, and I gloss over it because I don't want to make it about me. But at the end of the day, I do go, what is it? Like, is it the tattoos? Because in my generation, I guess I'm Gen X, younger Gen X, 45, but we really didn't there weren't as many of us with sleeves, and now part of like, it's more, I'm just part of everyone who has tattoos, which is so many.
How very punk of you back in the day to get the tattoos before it was cool to do it.
Yeah, right.
Do you mind talking a little bit about the journey into private practice? Because I'm always curious, especially for therapists who have maybe been in the field for a little less time, what messaging you got around opening your own practice and what support you got around that, and then like sort of how you just made that decision, because it took me way too long to start my own practice, and the only regret I have about it is that I spent so much of my career not doing it that way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm a previous business owner, so I've been in my history, like when I lived in Chicago, while I was a hairstylist and musician, I was pretty poor. I mean, I wasn't poor as a single person. I was all right. But when I finally kind of grew out of going and partying and doing all the things that I did for fun because I had a baby, I really wasn't making enough money because I was working part-time, and my daughter's dad was working like 3 jobs to make ends meet, and we were just kind of, we were okay. We were in a, 1 bedroom. It was a sweet apartment. Love that. That was like my favorite. But I remember just being like, because I clean as part of like a meditational thing. Like when I'm on the phone, it's back to that neurodivergence. Like I had no idea, but like I move. I'm always doing something it's like right now, me sitting here and talking, I would love to be moving around and talking because that's how my brain works. But and that said, unfortunately, that's not always how it goes. But like also, I clean. So I was cleaning. I was like, I need to do, like, I should get paid for this. And we kind of put our heads together and we started a cleaning company. It was just kind of like, okay, let's do it. And after he and I split several years, 10 years ago now, he still has it going. It's still going strong. It's an eco-friendly maid service. It's based in Chicago and they're doing great. And so I got it, and I realized this is not bad. This is not that hard. Like owning a business is not as hard as everyone thinks it is. And then I cut to many years later, I'm working for a salon again. And I was like, I'm just going to open my own place. So I opened it and opened my own salon suite, and I quit that because of COVID. I was like, I can't be in people's faces. They can't be in mine. So that ended, but it was fine. It was fine. And I think the reason I got into private practice so quickly was I learned doing just being an entrepreneur in my spirit. Like I don't like to be under anyone else's watch ever. Yeah. It's just not me. I like to make my own rules. And I like to make my own schedule. And that's how I thrive. And I need more downtime probably than the average person. Well, possibly. I think more people need more downtime than they even know. So I don't think the work week is healthy, to be honest. Unfortunately, people have to do it. And I know that it's like my privilege that I don't have to do that now. And I have a husband who, basically does do that. And I am so grateful for him because it's allowed me to kind of get my bearings, find my bearings doing this. It's involved. I did it at a really probably not the best time to do it in my life. My dad died in May. He got sick with a really aggressive cancer that he'd had in March, and that was super unexpected. Like they had no clue. And within, 2 months later, he was dead to the day. Yeah, it was really fast. Meanwhile, I'm trying to find a space, trying to like get out of my, I'm still seeing clients when I can. And I'm, a mom of a 12-year-old, and I am a stepmom to a 7-year-old, and I have a life and 2 dogs and 2 cats, and I don't live with my parents. So like I was driving back and forth, and my brother was in from Colorado where he lives. It was just like this, it was a chaotic time to start a private practice. Let's just say that. Right.
Sure.
And actively grieving. I'm still grieving, and I think, that's a process in and of itself. And yet I managed to do it. So if I can do it, anyone can do it. I'd say that I decided to go private pay. And I think that has been interesting because I believe that we deserve to be reimbursed for the work we do.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of messaging around that, and that's a whole other topic to get. But it's been an interesting process, and yeah, I'll just kind of leave it there, I think, for that, unless you
Yeah.
have questions.
Yeah. Well, and part of the reason I worked for other people for so long was because I didn't think I could do the business side of things. Like, I knew I was ADHD. I knew spreadsheets and tax forms and all that bullshit didn't like at all make sense.
Yeah.
I joke that like money as a concept doesn't make sense to my brain. Like I feel like I'm playing along with this whole concept. But it's not that bad. And I tell people like I resigned from a place, and then the person I was working for fired me because they were deeply offended that I was leaving. And like I opened my practice in a week, and that's absolutely not how to do it in any way, shape, or form. But like my ADHD brain with no business experience, no entrepreneurial experience, figured it out. Clients were served well, like without missing a beat. Like it isn't this prohibitive thing. Yes, there's finding space and rent and all of that stuff that goes into it. We can talk about naming our practices because we joked before I hit record about about that. But you know, like yeah, there's and for people who don't understand some of it, there's a lot of tools and things. I like to advocate for it, especially your young therapists who are tuning in to say like it isn't as hard or as bad as you fear it will be.
Yeah, and I think you get a lot of that messaging from the supervisors who have yet to leave the clinic, right? I got some of that. My supervisor, who I respect and adore, and I, if they listen, hey guys, because yeah, I get the fear, and also once you do it, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. You have to have the drive to do it. Essentially, like you have to want to do it, and the rest kind of is. But I think too, I really wanted to focus on the people I wanted to work with, right? The type of people, rather than just having a clinic feed me, like whoever kind of shows up, and I had very little. And maybe those people, wouldn't find the right fit in me because that's not necessarily the work that I do, or like maybe they want a very specific modality and I'm not working with that. And so practice makes so much sense for that, because you're really, I mean, not to say that my elevator pitch is really good right now. I don't know that that's that's not me. I'm probably, I say more than I need to. I'm not as articulate when it comes to that sort of thing. But I mean, I got to basically make that decision of like, okay, this is the population I want to work with. This is what I'm interested in. These are where my strengths lie. And I honestly think like how do you know if you work well with people unless you get a chance to work with that population? So yeah.
And serving clients who are a better fit for us, and also like that work-life balance. I don't take insurance. I make more money and work less hours than I ever have before. Not as like a brag. I'm not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but like my work is a lot better because I'm better rested. Have better resources. I'm practicing what I preach instead of just being like self-care is important. Also, haha, I'm burnt out all the time seeing 30 clients a week. Like it's different how I show up. And I think clients pick up on that.
100%. Yes. And I mean, we're not in it for the money. Even if private pay, you're not for the money. I mean, I guess you could be. I don't know what that looks like. But I just want.
I worked very briefly. The job I left was somebody who charged $250 a session, and that.
Yeah, I mean,
they have a couple of nice cars.
Yeah, right. couple two tree cars. Yeah, I mean, I don't have that desire. I just want more time. I want more time. I'm chilling and also able to kind of, because that self-care, especially as neurodivergent people, especially with life coming up, especially with someone's dad dying or your dog dying or whoever, you need to have that. I don't know how you do that with 30 clients in a week.
Even just simple stuff like a tire going flat on the way to a session. Like, man, I remember like just the doom and gloom of like, I'm missing out this much money and I'm stressed about that. And what if my clients don't come back? And like, cause I'm late because my tire blew out. And like, not having the resources to just like feel okay to like go and do therapy then, like,
Right.
with much
Yeah.
love to everyone who's on the edge of burnout, like therapists, we don't need to do therapy on the edge like that.
No, right. It's like, and I think more people would be coming into like, I think there are a lot of people going like becoming therapists, which is awesome. And because we need you. And
Mhm.
also I think that would really lighten the load for a lot of people. So many people need therapy, and there are a lot of therapists
Yeah.
coming into the charge for what you feel you need in order to live well and do
Right.
the ethical work that you're tasked to do, and
Yeah.
authentic whatever your interests are and like what you want to speak to. Um, but yeah, so yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's like really, yeah, I think that's the way, I think it's the way to go. It's the future.
Yeah. Unless, maybe we'll ever figure out universal healthcare, the only first world country to not have it. Who knows?
Just, yeah, keep positive, stay positive.
Yeah. Uh, Archipelago. Let's
You did
let's
it.
talk. Let's do a geography. I had to practice before we hit record. Uh, let's talk geography. Why Archipelago? Why that name? How'd you decide on it? What's its meaning to you? And then let's make jokes about picking practice names that are hard to pronounce.
Excellent. I like it. I picked it because, well, so I'm in my free time, I write, I do poetry. I don't know why that hurts to say that out loud. It does though, a little. um, and I just always like I love the word archipelago. I think it rolls off the tongue once you know how to say it. And
Yeah.
yeah, right. And also it's beautiful. It's like bells. The meaning behind it is really because it's a chain of islands essentially. And I think of humans as that we're kind of islands existentially, that's my kind of worldview, as we're alone, but also everyone's alone. So how are we really alone if everyone's having a really similar human experience, So there's
Yeah.
beauty there. And I like the idea of just kind of reaching out to your fellow island. If you see someone suffering, be
Yeah.
there. How you be there if you want to be there, if it's the person that you want to be there for, obviously boundaries. But I think that's kind of where I got that idea. And I'd used archipelago in a poem that I'd written several years ago. And it just keeps cropping up, that word for me and the
Yeah.
meaning behind it. And I think that life can be really lonely, but it really it doesn't have to be if we can kind of see the commonalities in each other. And I mean, it speaks to just, I think too, with couples work. I love working with couples like you. It was one of those things where people are like, ugh, they are either like, no way, that's not for
Yeah.
me. I can't handle it. It's stressful. And for me, I'm like, excellent. I'm like, get me in there. It's like,
Yeah.
there's something very satisfying about having three voices you know, or multiple voices in the room, which happens with family. I don't work with families because I think that maybe that's just my fear, but I think that's a whole other ball of wax. But with couples, I think it's really interesting because it's really not about, I become kind of I sit there and I mirror back what I hear, and I kind of
Yeah.
like challenge, like, and I think that what better illustration for that, even like a triad of people,
Mhm.
than islands, like who are all trying to like figure out how the other person is feeling and
Yeah.
learn how to communicate in a way that makes sense to that other person, and just so that they feel more seen and less alone. And that's all I just think that's all humans really want, is just to feel less alone and to feel like seen. And
Yeah.
I think that's done. I think it can be done. And I think people fuck up, and I think people, cheat, and they do it for a reason. And oftentimes, you know it doesn't make it easy, it doesn't make it not painful, but I think there's always like bridges, we can always erect
Mhm.
bridges. And I think it just comes down to like, okay, empathy. How do we like see our partners, how do we see each other? And I feel really, really excited to be in that process with people.
Yeah.
And so even though I'm a licensed professional counselor, I'm not an LMFT, I'm an LPC. For whatever reason, like that feels, I feel like I'm in the right place in those moments where I'm like, okay, y'all are talking, like that's happening. And
Yeah.
I love it. I love it so
Yeah.
much. I love individual work too, for a totally different reason. And in that case, it's two islands.
Yeah. I love, I can get a glimpse into your writing skills because it's very poetic naming. Because again, how many practices are be seen therapy or understanding something? Like, I will say to young therapists, open your own practice, but naming them's hard because so much stuff is trademarked. You want a website that isn't already taken, like blah, 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 all the wellness things. So I'm Wellness with Jer is my LLC because I was coming out of, I coach volleyball, and like you just shorten everyone's name. So everybody has a 1-syllable nickname because you just want to be able to shout something quickly. So I've been Jer for a lot of years. I mean, my friends, family call me Jer. It's an easy short for Jeremy, but like I had started my practice in like a week, and I was like, I just need something that isn't taken. So here, Wellness with Jer, let's go. And like so many people mispronounce it because they don't know it's short for Jeremy. And so like it's just this like silly thing of like comes up often. I was like, dang it, why did I name it that?
Wait, pronounce it. What is that? How does that
I've heard Jer a lot. Yeah. So, you know, we correct it. I've been Jeremy. I mean, like people mispronounce Jeremy as Jeremy a lot. So like I can sort of get that.
Yeah.
It's not a name that I think is super hard, but I hold grace for people who I got your last name wrong, which is a thing I do normally, and Archipelago was a word I had to practice several times. So English doesn't set you up to read phonetically very well.
No, before my dad died, actually, it was funny because I'd settled on Archipelago and Archipelago counseling. And I remember my dad, he was one of the most magical, kind, lovely, if you want to feel seen, go talk to my dad. He was he was an artist. He's amazing. And it was so out of character, but he was like, because he was sick at this point, and I remember him being like, you need to change it. Like Archipelago, no one's you should do it something. You need to do something different, and which is so unlike him. Normally he'd be like, I see, that's great, like that. I think it's interesting, it's unique, but he was like very kind of like no. And I was laughed, and I was like, well, I'm keeping it. It's too late.
You have part of it written out in your website on that, and I think the website's coded neurodivergent. I'm sure my brain picked up on that reading through it, but like just kind of loving like this whole idea, and I think there's such rich metaphor then for clients to grasp on pretty easily, and you can draw some philosophy into it. Like I love that stuff. Naming your business is hard too.
It's very hard. It's way harder than I thought it would be. So to echo your sentiment, 100. Yes, that's true.
Final thing I want to talk about today. We could go on and on for a long time, I'm sure. But what does self-care look like? What's cultivating joy look like? You talked about kind of getting through that chaotic time of your life of opening your practice. Where you're at today, right now, what does it kind of look like for how you take care of yourself while holding space for other people?
Well, me and my therapist and I have actually been talking about this because I tend to suffocate time. I tend to like just squeeze it out of my life. And I think that is the biggest thing, is just making sure there's space, room to breathe, like time to process my grief, dad still, to kind of and that really just I think looks like me going, like, rather than just kind of going, I'm feeling this, I'm gonna like concentrate on something else, which is something that's so human, that we all do, therapists and non-therapists alike. I think we just kind of go, okay, I'm feeling that, whatever, I gotta like go and do something though. I can't. It's actually pausing and being like, okay, I'm feeling this, and I'm just gonna let myself cry, or I'm gonna let myself just feel and be, and like what is maybe right. And I think like that's that, as well as like being in nature is huge. Just being in the world that is not filled with concrete and buildings and ideally other humans, because I think we need that space to kind of to do
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
To be, yeah. And I think time with like unabashed, like focused time, with people that I love, is like self, because it just is. It just is. So like, I don't know. We just got Ticket to Ride, this board game. Do you know about it at all?
It's about trains. Yeah.
Trains. It's a train game. And yeah, but it's so fun to play. Like, it's so fun to play. I like love it. And I love all those Euro games anyway, but that game is really easy to play with both my kiddo and my step kiddo. And so we said, just having like stuff where there's no screens, where it's just tactile, is so important for me. And so it's also connective. So yeah, I'd say that, and then moving my body. I got to move my body. Like I said earlier, I'm like diddling around and doing things anyway, but like actually like with intention, going and walking and moving and strengthening and doing things like that and breathing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my.
Yeah, I love all of, I relate deeply to a lot of that, one as a therapist, but also neurodivergent. Like time in nature is very important to me. I'm a neurodivergent and I'm an introvert. So I think that looks different for people who are maybe neurodivergent and extroverts. Time on the water is really important to me. Time in the woods is really important to me. Because it's stimulating. There's a lot of dopamine there, but it is that resting of your nervous system and kind of reset that we don't get elsewhere in modern society.
Yes, it's too much input. It's too much input. Absolutely. It's funny too, because I think about like all the input that I've had over the years. And even as I was like, as a young teen, when I started doing music and I fronted a band, and running into old like friends from back then, like from way back when, and then them finding out that I actually had deep like anxiety about being on stage in front of people. And I mean, we had fairly big audiences for what it was worth, like back then. And and I was like, yeah, I was losing my mind before. Like it was deeply, like my whole nervous system was completely screwed up. And they were like, really? And I'm like, I am an expert masker. Like at the time, the last person who talked, I still hadn't been diagnosed with ADHD, but like, like I said, everything falls into place once you get something that resonates for you, a diagnosis, if that's what it is. I have mixed feelings on diagnoses, but I think when they're accurate, they're so transformative. And I like that really just made me go, oh, this is why I drank so much in my 20s, to like quiet the noise, to quiet all of that input. Walking underneath the L, and like it would go over and everyone acted like it was whatever. And for me, it was just like, I felt like my whole body was on fire, and it was just this very like physical nervous system. And this sounds a little weird, but I'd start screaming like when it went over, because nobody could hear me screaming, and it would just release all of that energy, because it was just like, it was just too much, and looking back in my 40s, on my 20s, and a little bit of my 30s, I was like, oh, this is why I numbed out doing different things, like alcohol, those things. It was so that I could calm a nervous system I had very little control over. And I was always surrounded by people and cars and stuff and noise. And now it's like, I realize I need the exact opposite. I'm not music too. Same there too, just how I managed to do all of that stuff with all that loud, like the loud punk bands and just all of the rock, just all the things. It was just I'm kind of flummoxed at this.
You mentioned to being in doing music with jazz, and like jazz for me is one of those, like if I'm okay stimulated, I can really like vibe with it, and if I'm overstimulated, it's like grating. And it's like, it's not, I don't like or dislike jazz. It very much like that doesn't change. It's that my stimulation level changes, and therefore my response can look wildly different.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's like, everybody uses kind of like these one size fits all descriptors on like, well, I don't listen to this, or I can only handle going to, bars that are like this. And it's like, really, it's more about how are we feeling in our bodies in that. And I like see kind of, maybe that's when, you need to remove yourself. Like maybe it has nothing. It's just a matter of where you are nervous system wise, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of.
And I listen to a lot of metal, so I love the metal heads who are also neurodivergent, because like, oh yeah, that double kick just like stresses other people out, but calms me right down.
I mean, I don't know that there's anything better than a double kick.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Right. Sure. Yes. I have a random question. It'll make sense for an episode that hasn't aired yet, but do you have any bird tattoos?
Oh yeah. Yes.
I'm gonna start asking everybody in the podcast, because I connected. I went to a retreat with a bunch of non-theistic pagans, and it was really lovely. But we discovered how many of us have neurodivergence and how many of us have bird tattoos, because I think us neurodivergent folks are being in nature because it's stimulating and calming for us. So it was a really high correlation of those of us who are neurodivergent and have bird tattoos. So that's my
wild. What? Yeah. That's wild. Yeah, I have one here, here. In fact, I have. It was funny because I was like, I want to get this. I want to get a crow in honor of my dad. My dad really loved crows, and I was like, do I need another bird? I have so many birds. That's a funny. I look forward to hearing that.
Yeah, my very informal research I'm conducting about the overlap between neurodivergence and bird tattoos, but there's a correlation. I'm pretty confident.
It's pretty funny.
Bria, this has been awesome to get to know you and learn from you and connect. If people want to learn more about your work, if they want to work with you, where do they go? How do they find you?
Ditto. Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, I am at Archipelago counseling LLC.com. It's a long one. I get it.
Yeah.
You can find me kind of if you just Google search my name, Bria Servoss LPC. But yeah.
That's cool. And we'll have show links to that stuff. We'll have the links in the show notes for people to find that stuff more easily.
Cool. It's been so great talking with you. This is fun.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And to all our wonderful listeners, thanks for taking the time to tune in. We'll be back next week with another new episode. Take care, everyone.